Hi, my name is Brian Hoyland. I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with you a story that I have about what happened when I died. I saw Jesus and I went to heaven. Now, that sounds pretty drastic, and I know that a lot of people are going to take a step back when they hear this, but listen to the whole story. I'm going to explain what happened and led up to this. And just the overall changes that have happened to me because of this experience. A lot of people have asked for me to do this without an interviewer because they want to hear my story without any interruptions. I do like the idea of an interviewer because it gives me some feedback on what I might not be describing properly or able to translate effectively, as what I'm trying to convey to you is far beyond my ability as a human being to articulate into our verbal language what I actually experienced. But I'm going to make my best effort, and hopefully you guys can get something out of this, because God loves us and he is so fantastic. And the only word I can really use to describe him is awesome. He is so far beyond what we could ever imagine. So I'm going to start with back in August of 2016, I started to go into this heart failure. It was chronic end stage heart failure, but my heart rate started going to over 300 beats per minute. I had heart arrhythmias, ventricular tachycardia in particular, but I had several others. But it was causing my body to shut down and not pump blood. So basically, my heart was attempting to pump, but nothing was coming out. So it was working extra hard to try to get the blood to go flowing through the rest of my body. You can look some of that stuff up. I'm not a medical expert, so I'm not going to even try to explain it all in detail, but that's what was going on. What had happened was I was exposed to toxic chemicals while I was in the military. And because of that exposure, I developed several autoimmune diseases, one of which particularly attacks my organs and takes the good, healthy tissue and turns it into scar tissue. And when that happened in my heart, as the heart needs to be, flexible and be able to move and pliable, it made it really hard, because the scar tissue is a hard substance. It's not something that's pliable, can do what the heart actually can do. So when you have scar tissue there, your heart's not working properly. And so that was what was happening, but we didn't know about this. I started to go into the heart failure, and on, I think it was August 27th of 2016, I started becoming really sick in the middle of the night. I was throwing up and it was projectile vomiting. I mean, it was going pretty far. And I was with my children alone. My wife had gone to her family's cabin for the weekend. So I was alone with the kids, and, I really didn't know what was happening. I'd never experienced anything like that. So I didn't want to call the ambulance and have it be, indigestion or something. You hear about these cases where people call and it's really not a big deal. I really didn't suspect that it was my heart, even though it felt like my heart was going crazy. It felt like, like a huge, enormous, powerful man was jumping right on my chest. It was intensely painful, and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't see real well, and everything was spinning. It was a pretty scary experience. But I waited until the morning, and finally I had enough. I thought, well, maybe if I climb down to the room or down to the living room and get some fresh air, maybe I'll feel a little better. So I crawled down the stairs, and I literally had to actually crawl on my butt and, just slide down the stairs. And then once I got to the bottom of the stairs, I had to crawl on my hands and knees to get to the couch. I couldn't get up. I was so physically weak. But then I had laid on the couch and things weren't getting better. It started getting even worse. And, I was texting my wife and telling her, as best I could what was going on, but she didn't understand what was really happening. And, we barely got a chance to talk. And finally I told my kids, I said, you probably should call the ambulance now. I don't know what's going to happen. And, inside I knew that it was close to the end. I thought I probably wasn't going to make it very long, because it was really intense pain. And the fact that I was starting to lose my vision even more, and, just the whole room was shaking and spinning. I felt like this was going to be it, and I might not get another chance to call an ambulance. So my kids called the ambulance. As soon as the paramedics got there, they took my pulse real quick, and then they ripped my clothes off. Well, they took scissors and they started cutting my shirt off and putting paddles on me. And once they got the paddles on, I was asking them, like, what is this, my heart? They said, yeah, your heart is over 300 beats a minute. We have to bring it down immediately or you're going to die. So they shocked me. And, amazingly, that shock felt actually kind of good, because it did bring my heart rate down, and it was considerably lower. So I could breathe again. I was starting to feel a little bit better. Not great, obviously. I was still dying, but it was better than it had been. And I told the paramedics, I'm like, hey, can I have another one of those? Because it did bring it down. It felt good. And that's really the one of the last things I saw. The very last thing I saw, though, as I was being wheeled out to the ambulance, because that's what they had to do. They had to lower my heart rate to be able to get me to the ambulance and transport me to the hospital. But as I was going out on the gurney, I happened to, go through the hallway, past my children to the front door. And the looks on their faces, I could tell they thought their dad was dead. And that was pretty hard. That was a really tough experience to see. The very last thing you see is to see your kids' faces when they look like that, and there's nothing you could do. But then they got me into the ambulance, and I don't remember anything else of this particular experience at that point. I guess I continued to fight. I was talking, I was answering questions, but I don't remember anything. They ended up having to intubate me, and they called my wife and told her that, your husband's going to die. You need to get here quickly, and you need to sign some paperwork, but he's not going to make it. Well, I made it. The very next day, I ended up waking up, and they decided to take me off the intubation. And, they thought I was never going to be normal again. They thought I was going to have some extremely large deficits in my brain capacity due to the damage that I had suffered. And, to their surprise, I didn't. And I recovered really quickly. They thought I was going to be in the hospital for the rest of my life, which they thought was going to be a very short life, that, there was no way I was going to be able to live through this experience. But I made it out in a week out of the hospital. And, they put a defibrillator in hopes that, if this happened again with my heart, that it would shock me out of those arrhythmias. So they sent me home, and over the next few months, it was really brutal. I was shocked several times, and with a heart that was dying, it was really an intense pain to be shocked. I mean, I felt it for days afterwards. I felt my body so weak from these things, and I was shocked multiple times. I mean, this defibrillator was shocking me regularly. And then, of course, I was also in stage heart failure and having those complications. So the next few months were really miserable, and I had this fear. Like, I knew I was going to die, and I just wasn't in the right place. Like, I knew something was wrong between me and God, because these last few years, I went on to get a master's degree in psychology, and, started working as a psychotherapist for the last several years before this. And, I always thought I was living a really good life, but it was a good life based on my principles. So it was based on what I thought was right, not because I was doing it because God demanded it. I was doing it for myself. And I really knew that there was a disconnect there, that I had to really own up to this. And it wasn't quite that easy. These few months were a real blessing that God allowed me to have that amount of time to really come to terms with how I'd been living my life. But I knew I was going to die. And so things were getting progressively worse, and I was in and out of the hospital regularly. It was a few surgeries here, a few there, but it was basically the doctors had no clue what was actually causing my heart to fail. I didn't have all the other markers of heart disease. In fact, I had no other markers. It was just that my heart wasn't working properly. But everything else, I was in really great shape. I had ran marathons, I weightlifted. I was a workout beast. And so I didn't fit into the category of what they typically saw with heart failures. So come January, well, I'm gonna just tell in December, I I went to the Cleveland Clinic, and they were unable to help me with an ablation. I'm not sure what the real reasons were, but the doctor ended up telling me that I need to just focus on the quality of life, not quantity. And in the situation that I was in, there was no quality of life whatsoever. Um, unless I would have gotten closer to God, but that wasn't the request or the recommendation. It was just to just live out the rest of your life, and however long that might be ready. It's not going to be long. And so I had that kind of a distrust or even a bitter taste in my mouth from that experience, but mostly because he told the same thing to my wife. And so, I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm dying from my wife. I don't want her to worry any more than she already was, and she was terrified. But that saying from the doctor really shook her. And at this point, my wife was now starting to kind of look at me like I'm dead. Like there's nothing that we're going to be able to do. You're gone. And that I could feel her worry, and that was really hard. But as soon as I got back from the Cleveland Clinic, I got shocked a couple more times, and then I went to work because I had to work. I had no other way to support my family, so I went to work, and I ended up getting shocked 6 times. One time while I was at work, but then they made me drive home, so I had to drive home. And as I was driving home, I was calling my wife, and I said, we got to get an ambulance. As soon as I get there, we have to take me to the hospital. I'm dying here. And I kept getting shocked the whole time. And she was talking to me so that way I wouldn't, be shocked and just on my own, but there was nothing else I could do. And I was on the interstate, so I wasn't able to pull over. There was people kind of driving by, but I was, slowing down, speeding up, and I was erratically driving because I'm getting shocked the whole time. But I had to pull over into a parking lot. It happened to be a church parking lot. And I pull in, and I was able to give the directions or the name of the church to the ambulance. And they came out, they picked me up, took me to the hospital. I got shocked one more time while I was in the ambulance. But then we got there, and that was, 6 times, that was the limit that my defibrillator had. So I wasn't able to be shocked anymore. But they got me into the hospital just in time. They were able to get my heart rate under somewhat control, got me up to the ICU, and were able to stabilize me. But I was in the hospital for a week that time, and I got out on Christmas Eve. I told the doctors, I said, you know what, I'm going to die. I want to spend Christmas with my family. This might be the last one I have. I'm either going to die here in the hospital or I'm going to die at home, but there's nothing you guys are going to be able to do for me. You don't know what's even happening. So the doctors agreed, and they let me go. They just, under the condition that if I got worse, I would call the ambulance. And of course I would. But then we found that I had this autoimmune disease. I really pushed for it while I was in the hospital. I was Googling a lot and, taking the matters into my own hands because the doctors were really uncertain. But I found a differential diagnosis that explained what was happening to me. And I told the doctors I wanted it to be checked out. And, I was a little concerned that they hadn't already done so, but we're at this point anyway. So I thought, well, let's just get it done. We did get it done. They brought in some experts, and they found, through some biopsies in my neck and in some other areas, that I did have this autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, and it was attacking my heart, all of my organs for that matter. But really, it was devastating my heart. Everything else was shutting down when my heart was not pumping properly. So after a while, those other organs started to come back, but not for a couple of years now. But after I got out of the hospital and got that found, the disease found, they started treatment with prednisone. So we were on heavy doses of prednisone, which is a really difficult drug to be on in and of itself. But then January 15th at midnight, I went into this really strange arrhythmia. And it was just low enough that it was barely below the threshold of where my defibrillator would kick on and give me a shock and bring me back down. So it wasn't working properly. And, it had this feeling like I was going to die. I knew it was coming. I just couldn't quite understand it, because this was even different than the other times I've had experienced where, you feel like you're gonna you're in a really bad situation, or you might even die. But this one, I knew I was going to die. There was just no doubt about it, that there was nothing that was going to be able to happen to save me from this. So they brought me in, and for 7 hours, I was in the ER fighting for my life. And during that fight, their whole attempt was to try to get me stabilized enough just to bring me up to the ICU. Finally, they thought they had me after 7 hours. They thought they had me stabilized enough where they could do that. As soon as they transferred me from the ER bed to the ICU bed, I went right back into super high arrhythmias. It was so high that they immediately called a code blue, and the room filled with a ton of medical personnel. I mean, doctors, nurses, technicians. There were so many people. They didn't give me any introductions or anything, but there was about 20 people, I think, filling into that room, some coming and going. But there was a lot of people in my room, and they started strapping me down, and they had these sticky pads on for the paddles, but they plugged that all in. They were moving my arms all over the place, giving me shocks here and there, trying to bring the heart rate down, but nothing was working. And the whole time I couldn't move, but my head was stuck against the bed, and I only had one peripheral, or one vision that I could see. And it was this crucifix that was sitting on the wall. Happened to be in a Catholic hospital. So it was nice that they did have this crucifix. And that was the whole thing I was doing for 7 hours. I was praying to God. Like, I knew I was going to die. So I was trying to confess every single sin I could think of. And, with the fear just coming down and just oppressing me, I was really trying to come up with every single thing I could think of. But this is an example of the cross. It's not the exact same cross, but this is the crucifix that was sitting on the wall. This is the exact same one, just not the particular one that was on there. So I was able to find this, and it really means a lot to me, because I don't know, I guess as you're dying and you have one thing that you're holding on to, and but it was the connection to what it symbolizes, because I could feel Jesus with me in that room. There was like an evil presence kind of outside the doors. I felt like, I don't know if it was death or if it was, demons or just whatever was going on out there. But, ICU is kind of like that anyway. It's a little bit of a creepy place. But I could feel the death just looming over me. And it was terrifying, especially with everything that I was going through. I mean, I couldn't breathe. My organs were all shutting down. My liver, my kidneys, they were completely shut down. My lungs, they were shutting down. Everything that was going on in my body was not working properly. And it was just severe pain that I was experiencing. And it was so traumatic. To be there alone and not have anybody with you is terrifying in and of itself. But to know that you're going to die, and you're going to die alone, that's the most terrifying thing I think you can think of. And but I had this crucifix, but it was that connection to Jesus, because he literally was right there. I could feel his presence and his calming effect, and I just wanted it. I just wanted that. I didn't want all the other chaos and all the other pain and suffering. And so I told Jesus, I'm like, I'm ready to go. Just take me. And the nurses were asking me a lot of questions, like, what's your name? What's your address? Things that they already knew that I knew, or that they knew, but they were doing it just to keep me present. And at this point I thought, I'm done. I'm ready to die. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm not going to keep fighting. So I closed my eyes, and they said, Brian, we need you to open your eyes. I said, I'm not opening my eyes. And that was it. The last breath I could get out. It was horrible. It was really hard to even get that out. But I just laid back, and I just thought, just take me, God, just let me go. And that's when I felt death come on me. And it was so powerful and it was an intense pain. Death wasn't a pleasant experience, but it was over like that. So it really isn't even a big deal. All the other suffering I had was far worse than death, even though death was more painful, but it was over just like that. But as soon as I died, it was like a snap and a pop. Like I could feel my soul literally just exit my body, and it was intense. But as soon as my soul exited my body, I was immediately in peace and love and joy. I mean, it was just swarming into my soul. Like I had no control over it. It was the whole atmosphere was filled with this love. There's just this incredible amount of love. All the chaos from the hospital room instantly stopped. All the noise, all the fear, all the negative emotions, anger about not being able to control my situation, sadness over not being able to see my family, just the fear of what it was going to be like when I died or if I had to continue suffering. All of that was gone. There was no emotion except for this love. And it wasn't like a human type love. This was like love itself, like purity. This is something that's so far beyond, and I'm not even going to really try to explain it. Whatever you can think of love, multiply that by a number you can't even imagine, and that might get you close to where you can start to understand how much of an impact this love has on us. But I'm in this dark tunnel, and I'm like, wow, I just died. I mean, it was so obvious that I died. I didn't have to have anyone explain it to me. I knew what had happened. But I never lost any conscious thought. I knew what had happened all those 7 hours leading up to my death. The very moment of my death, I had that. And now I'm in this other place and my consciousness is still flowing, except I was like instantly far more intelligent than I've ever even thought of being. It was as if my cognitive abilities had no limitations. And so I'm looking at this dark void, and it's like outer space, except without all the planets and the stars, the pictures you've seen. But it's this huge void. I mean, just big, huge, empty, dark space. And I'm looking at this and from my tunnel, and I'm like, wow, this can't be it. As I'm feeling this love and this joy, and I knew I didn't want to just be in existence with nothing, because there was something more inside of my soul that was like being called to that love. That love was so gentle and so sweet that the only thing I wanted was to find the source of it. But that dark void was trying to entice me. It was manipulative. It was ugly. It was very similar to that evilness that I felt in that ICU room, but it was on the outside of the room. It was like that, but it was talking seductively, trying to get me to come into that dark void. But the love was so powerful that I was in awe of it. I was just standing there in awe. And I was looking at this dark void, and I realized that I was seeing into the dark void. So there had to be some sort of light. And that's when I recognized that I now had this, not only cognitive abilities that had increased, but there was a new sensory ability with my vision. And I could see 360 degrees all at the same time. And so behind me, there was this bright light. I mean, it was just emanating this brilliant light all the way into the darkness, everywhere that I was. It was just beautiful. And so I turned to look at this light, and that's where my focus went. I could still see the dark void behind me, but my focus was now on this light. And I knew immediately that this light was God. And so I wanted to be with that light. And I said, I want to be with that light. And as soon as I said that, I was right there in front of this light. But this is the cool part, is that I remember every single step that I took to get there, which was a lot, because I could see really far now. So I could see that light was so far off, farther than anything I've ever seen in human life, even with a telescope or anything like that. So it was a long distance. But I remember every single step I took to get to that light. And, I would have assumed that I had been traveling so fast, but I didn't feel any inertia. I didn't feel wind on my face. I didn't feel any kind of internal feelings that would have given me an idea that I had moved so quickly in order to be there in that span of time. And yet I took all those steps. So it would have taken far longer than that quick little momentary blink of an eye that it took to actually get there. So time was totally disrupted. I had no concept of it. But then I'm standing in front of this light, and it was so bright. I mean, it was brighter than anything you could ever imagine. This light was so intensely bright, and yet it wasn't hurting my eyes. It was actually like feeling good coming into me. I could feel it coming into every aspect of my soul, but it was warm and it was gentle, but it was so loving. It was like, you know, in the hospital, they often will ask you if you want a warm blanket. That's kind of what this felt like, except even more perfect than that. I mean, a warm blanket's nice, but this was just like your soul needed that feeling. Like without that feeling, your soul would have been empty. So I'm looking at this light, getting this wonderful feeling. And I'm, of course, playing with my eyesight because that was really a cool thing. But I was looking off to the side and I couldn't see the end of this light. And what was really interesting about my vision is that I could actually watch my vision grow. So as I'm looking towards the end of this light, I could actually travel with my eyesight as it was continually growing and trying to seek out the end of this light, but it never found it. And then I went to the other side, same thing, couldn't find the end of that. It just kept going and going. No matter how far I think I would have looked, my eyesight could never have seen the end of this light. It was that immense. Same thing up and down. I mean, no matter where you looked, it was completely all light everywhere. And so I'm looking at this light and I'm just in awe of it. And then I hear inside of my head, it wasn't an audible voice. It was more of my brain knew what was happening and what was being said to me. And I was told, if you want to come in, come in. And so I knew that this was God. Now, I didn't see God's physical body. It was this light. So, you know, very well could be just that this light was some manifestation of God. You know, it really felt like it was just his love, and it was alive and it was moving. It was powerful. But I didn't see, you know, a being or anything like that to represent God. But God was definitely within this light somehow. And so I start walking in, and it was as if my soul was like a straw or kind of a funnel, you know, something you pour a liquid into and it's, or, you know, suck it into, but you're never empty of it. You're drinking. If you're drinking from a straw, you're just drinking through and it's coming in from the source and it's going into your mouth. And that's what this was like. It was like that love was just pouring into my soul and it was going back out into the rest of heaven, but I was never empty of it. It was just constantly inside of me and filling me. But the whole time it was filling me, it was just shaving off these ugly little pieces of sin that I was attached to, things that I had inside my soul that I just hadn't been ready to get rid of. It was like healing all of the wounds that you have in life. You know, all the things that I had suffered up until I died, those were all healed. And they actually felt good. All of the suffering that I had gone through felt even better because of all the love that was coming in. And I honestly think that my experience there of that healing wouldn't have been as powerful had I had not suffered anything in my life. It was every single thing that I had suffered was being made better. He was healing all of the broken places in me. He was mending all of the things within me that were wounded from life. And I didn't care. I didn't care about all the things. The suffering that I went through, I was happy to have gone through it because of how wonderful it now felt. Where when I died, I gave up. I wasn't happy then. And here I am with a totally changed perspective. And that was the power that I realized God has, is he knows us so well and he loves us so much more than we do, that everything that he allows to happen to us is for our own good. And, you know, I never understood that in life, but here I completely understood. And so then I said, I want to see Jesus. I had this internal desire to see Jesus. I knew he was there. I could still feel him, but it was more of a compulsion. Like I internally had to see Jesus. And as soon as I said that, the light opened up and I was in this huge room, and it was even bigger than that dark void, which was immense. I mean, like I said, it was like outer space looking into that. This room was far bigger than that. But I had this sense because, you know, I couldn't see to the back of it. My eyesight, I tried, but it just kept going. So I ended up not continuing with that. But I never saw the end of it, but I inherently knew this was not all of heaven. This was like an entry point or a gathering space where, you know, there was a bunch of other beings there that were welcoming me. I mean, and this was a lot of beings. I want to make sure I highlight this. I don't know what a trillion beings would look like, but if I had to put a number on it, I would say trillion. But I don't know what a trillion anything looks like. I don't know what a million anything looks like. But this was far bigger than anything you could ever imagine. It would be like looking at the beach, and every little grain of sand was a being. That's kind of what this would have been like. You had no idea, no concept of how many grains of sand are on a beach. Same thing within heaven. I didn't have a concept of how many beings were here. But with my eyesight, it was really cool because there was nothing that was hidden from me. So if there was a being standing in front of another being, I could see both beings at the exact same time. Nothing was hidden. It wasn't as if, I could only focus on one or the other. Whatever one I focused on became the predominant view I had, and the other ones were kind of a periphery. But I could see everything, front and back of every being, up and down. I mean, I could see every single aspect of every being or everything that was there. But there was this one being in particular it was obvious it was Jesus. I didn't have to have a sign or anybody introduce me. I knew who it was, but he was standing off a distance from me. But I immediately looked at him and I was like, Jesus, I want to see your face. And all the beings, and including Jesus was like this pure white, pure, beautiful light that was just glistening. And, he had other lights within him that were just like reflecting the light of God and purity. I mean, it was the exact same thing. So it was like this relationship between the light that was encompassing this entire room and Jesus, this being that I was looking at. You could see that the light was exactly the same. Now, all the other beings, they kind of look like cells underneath of a microscope, with the little moving parts, and all those moving parts were light and they were just bright and beautiful, but they were diminished compared to what Jesus was and to that great light that was encompassing the room. But they had a sense of that, as if that healing process that I was going through, they had gone through it, and it was now emanating this wonderful light from them. And it was beautiful, and it was happy, and it was joyful. And as soon as I said that I wanted to see Jesus's face, his face started to come together, and all the other beings, I could see who they were. I could see that they were different beings from all throughout history, and loved ones and whatever else. But my focus was on Jesus. So everything else is kind of like a blur to me. I kind of have an idea of who I saw and what I saw, but it's not good enough that I would risk telling people that, because I think that could be misunderstood. But what I saw with Jesus, there was no misunderstanding that. Jesus was so crystal clear. And as I'm looking at him, I could see his features of his face and how he was smiling at me. And it was beautiful. That smile melted my heart. It melted all the ugliness that you could ever want to hold on to. You just want to throw it away. You don't want it anywhere near him. I didn't want anything of my sins. I wanted all that stuff gone, because of how wonderful his smile was. It was love. It was just that the love was already emanating from him, but the smile was just the icing on the cake, that I love you no matter what. I made you. It's like his nature was to love. That's the best way I can describe it. His nature is to love, and you can tell that he just loves me. I could sit there and say, well, why would God love me? Why, what did I do to deserve that? Nothing. I did nothing to earn his love. That's his nature. He made me, and he loves me, and he loves you too. And that's the beautiful thing I learned, is that there is no favorite. I mean, he didn't love me more than he loves somebody else, and didn't love me any less. People are going to be closer to him, and there were people who were closer to him, but clearly I could tell that they had lived better lives than I had, and I wasn't upset about it. I understood that was the way it should be. I would never have even tried to get closer to him, because of just how I recognized where I was. But it wasn't as if I was given less of his love. His love was still the fullest. It was perfect. I would never have even dreamt of anything better than that, nor would I still. And so as as his face was clear, I was not able to actually lay down the memory. So this is the weird part, is that as his face was going into my eyes and I was taking it in, I could see what I was seeing. I did not lay down one single memory. It'd be kind of like if you had a picture and you were able to flip it up and flip it back down. You might have an idea of what it looked like, but you couldn't really give a good rendition of what you saw. So I guess that's kind of the best way I can explain this. But I could not remember his face even as I was looking right at it. So that was really bizarre. But what I could remember was this intensely bright light. It was every bit as bright as that light, but it was boom right there in my face. And that's what I was able to remember of Jesus's face, was just this immensely bright light. It was so beautiful and healing. And even the memory of it now is so wonderful to just sit back and think about how much he loves us. And that's what that light was. It was just love. Like, his face is enough to just heal all the wounds of your whole life. Just having his face looking at you, it was so beautiful. And it's because you know how much he loves you. And so I asked Jesus, as I'm also talking to him, that, all the other people, I knew everything that they were thinking. It's as if there was like this free exchange of our minds. Like, there was the atmosphere was alive too. And the atmosphere was like a greenish, pinkish. I don't know how else to describe it. That's kind of the colors that look like, but it was not really those colors. It was far more vibrant than anything I've ever seen. But what was cool is that the atmosphere was alive, and it was as if it was connecting that really bright light that was encompassing the whole room with Jesus and all the other beings. So it was as if all of us had this like collective consciousness where all of our thoughts and all of our actions or our wills were all united into one. And it was all united with Jesus. And, I'm not a submissive person. There is no human being I would ever bow down to, not ever. And I just don't have that desire to ever do that. But with Jesus, this was a different feeling. He never once asked me to bow down, but my whole soul was bowing down in the way that it was just reverent of him. And like I said, he didn't ask me to be. This was just my own. I wanted to be reverent. I wanted to be so reverent to him because of how wonderful it felt. It was as if my soul knew what it should do. And he was just still smiling at me as we're reviewing every single sin that I had gone through my whole life. All the big ones, I obviously had confessed those. I was actually really sorry for most of my sins. I had 7 hours in the ER to confess them. But I obviously didn't get to everything. There were things that I had not done, things that I should have, sticking up for people. I usually stuck up for people most of the time. But if I didn't like somebody, I would often choose to not stick up for them, even though I knew that they were right. And that's a pretty low thing, but it's common. It's what human beings do. We get hurt feelings, or we get upset with somebody. We just don't like them, and we won't go stick our neck out for them. But I realized how that really hurt that person. I also saw how it was hurting Jesus. And that was really intense to see that ripple effect of how our actions or lack of actions affect others, and how that impacts the entire world. It's not just, well, I just didn't do this because I didn't like that person. That didn't really hurt anybody because I just didn't do it. No, it actually has lasting impacts. And it's really impactful on people's lives. But it also hurts Jesus, because every time we choose not to do something we know is right, or we do something that is wrong, he had to answer for it. And that's the beauty of our salvation through him, is that you could see how he had worked this out for us. But now I had to come to terms with this, because these were things that, the really horrible things, they were easy. I didn't want to do those again. And many of them I never even thought of doing again. I did them once. I hated it. I was never going to do it again. I really was sorry. But these other ones, I wasn't so sorry for. There were things in there that I felt justified for. Well, this person did this to me. Why shouldn't have I beat them up? Or why shouldn't have I done this to them? And, in a human aspect, I would have plenty of people say, yeah, that's right. You had every right and every justification to do it. But that's not how it worked there. It was more of this perfect law that I could have ignored these things. I could have chose to do things in a different way, and it would have had a far better impact on all of humanity, not just that person. Those ripple effects actually go pretty far, and they extend very widely into all of human life. So I was seeing all these things, and what was most amazing about this was the attachments I had to these things. As soon as I saw what they had done and how the impact had been on Jesus and on this other person and on humanity in general, I all of a sudden didn't want them anymore. And I hated it. I wanted to get rid of those things. And as soon as I started to want to get rid of it, I could feel like a lightness, like he was literally taking these things and healing me from it. While I'm looking at what I did to Jesus, he's healing me from the sins that I had done, because there is an impact on us. It stains us. It hurts our souls, and I don't know that this was my only consequence for these sins that I had done, but I did feel like I was totally forgiven. Like, I'm looking at him and he's forgiving me for these horrible things. And so I told Jesus, I said, I remember I prayed to you when I was 6 years old. And, I thought you answered that prayer. And just to give you a little background, he did answer that prayer. He tells me so. But when I was 6 years old, I saw my great grandma die, or I didn't see her actually die. I went to her funeral, but I saw the aftermath of that. I saw all my aunts and uncles, everybody that I cared about. As a little kid, you're looking at all these people you really look up to, and they're all crying about the loss of your great grandma, who I also loved very much. She was super sweet. But to see how that impacted them, that really hurt me. And I remember I went home and I was praying, I was crying a little bit. I didn't want people to cry over me, but I was so upset, so distraught. And I just asked God, I was like, please just don't let me die young. I don't want people to cry over me like that. And after, a couple hours of praying, I mean, it was a long time, especially for a 6-year-old to sit there and pray, but I did. And I got this feeling, this just flush of comfort that came over me. And I knew God had answered my prayer. I didn't feel like I needed to pray anymore. Like, it felt like my prayer had been answered. And he affirmed that in heaven. He's like, yeah, I remember that. And it still stands. And so I was like, wow, that's amazing. So I knew at this point he was going to let me come back if I wanted to. And that's when he says, well, why would you want to? It wasn't a question like, well, why would you want to go back and live life again? That's a dumb idea. That wasn't what he was intending. It was to make me search out what would be my reason, because coming back to life and just living the same life as I had before would have been no good. That wouldn't have been worthwhile. But I knew that this was an extra chance at life, that long life that he had promised that he would give me when he answered my prayer, he was still offering to me. But I had to think of why it would be important for me to go back. I had lived a good life. And look at all the things I had done and accomplished in my life. I lived a very accomplished life. I was really happy with what I had done in my life. But those things had changed, because you can't take those trophies with you when you die. All that stuff stayed back there. So that part of my life was dead. It was dead and gone. And I didn't even care. Good riddance. So it was like this new being was now present and was able to make this choice of coming back. And I thought, well, what about my family? They need me, my kids, my wife, they're going to be really upset without me and they need me. I need to help them get to heaven. And, it was an honorable thing to think about, but it wasn't like I had that kind of power. And he made that very clear. Jesus has a good sense of humor, but he's looking at me. He's like, well, what makes you think that you have that kind of power? You didn't do that with, the first part of your life. What do you think that you're going to be able to come back and control the people? We don't have that kind of power. And he was letting me know that. And so he showed me how he has their best interest and how he loves them every bit as much as he loves me, which is more than I love my own kids, more than I love myself. It's, far more than I could ever even imagine loving. He loves us more than that. So of course he's going to take care of my kids and my family. So I knew that wasn't the right answer. It wasn't that I wasn't going to come back and still be with my family. That was for sure. I was going to get that. But it was, I had to find a different purpose. I had to find a reason beyond my family. I couldn't have any unhealthy attachments to life, because those unhealthy attachments prevent you from living the life that God wants you to live. And I knew this. I knew that's what he wanted. That was the answer that I had to come up with. And so as I realized this, I said, well, I could do way more for you. I didn't do enough. And I looked at all the sins that I had done, and I realized I hadn't done enough for God. And that was what really got me going. It was like a slap in the face in a way, because I knew what I had not done. And I could have, because I had far more desire to serve God. I had far more abilities that I could have used in that service, and I didn't. I neglected those things. And so as soon as I said that, that's when God just smiles and he says, then okay, you can go back. And at this point, he didn't tell me exactly what was going to happen when I came back, but he did let me know the pain was going to be worse. My suffering wasn't going to go away. It wasn't going to be miraculously healed. I had hoped for this. I had wanted it, but it wasn't going to happen the way that I thought. So I didn't know what was going to happen. He wasn't telling me exactly, but, he's going to make sure that I still had that uncertainty that human beings really do actually need to have in order to have trust in God, because that is the key. We have to trust him. We have to trust him because he loves us more than we love ourselves. How could we not trust him? We are going to damage ourselves far more than God ever would, because he won't damage us. He won't harm us. He loves us. Now, does he let things happen? I can look back on my life. I saw a lot of things that he allowed to have happen, but I also saw how those things came to fruition in goodness and increased my life and the value I had in my life and just the overall enjoyment that I had in life because of those sufferings, those things that form us, that build strength and character into us, are not just anecdotal. Those are real things that happen, but we often don't connect those little golden threads that God places in our life that sews us to a relationship with him. And so I saw these things and I knew that's what I needed to do. And, he tells me that I need to do 3 things. These are the 3 things I need to focus on for my happiness in life and for my mission, my purpose, to accomplish what was my purpose for coming back. And I needed to pray more. I thought I probably prayed enough. I realized now I didn't pray enough, but before I died, I always thought, wow, I'm doing things just good enough. I didn't think that it was bad. I thought I was doing enough to get by. I thought it was what God expected, but it wasn't, and it's not that he wants you to sit there and pray in fear. He wants you to pray in relationship to him. That love that he has when he was looking at me and sinning, he wants me to go to him every time and talk to him. Just tell him what's going on. Even just like a little child, they never be quiet. My youngest one in particular, he's a chatterbox. That kid never stops talking. And he's been that way his whole life. But when a kid, particularly when they're little, it's cute. It's fun. They're constantly asking you a million questions. You don't have the answers to everything, but they don't care. As soon as you start answering it, they're just asking another one anyway. But that's kind of how we need to be with God. We just need to just talk to him, just tell him things. And that's what he really showed me, is that I just need to share my life with him, to just open it up, not try to control things like I had done, because I got myself into trouble. But when you open up to God, he'll give you the keys to living a life successfully. And so I knew that that's what I had to do. I had to pray more, and I had to elevate my mind to God on a regular basis. And that was probably the easiest thing he gave me. The next thing he told me I had to do was to suffer joyfully. And part of that was connected to the prayers, because he was willing to share those burdens with me. I did have to suffer. He told me I'm going to suffer when I come back, and it's going to be worse. And, I was no longer afraid. So I had that trust. I was holding his hand. I knew that he was going to take care of me on the way back, and I could handle it. It wasn't going to be like when I died and I was giving up and I was like, God, just take me. I can't handle this anymore. All of a sudden, things were different because I had that trust in him. And that's what suffering joyfully is about. It's not that you are all excited about all the suffering that's going to come. Nobody can find excitement with that. However, knowing that God's allowing it to happen and that something good is going to come from it, as long as you trust in him, because he's not going to let anything bad happen to you. He's not. It might seem like in life that things are going to be bad. My heart, it seemed like it was pretty bad from a human aspect. However, as I'm in heaven, I'm thinking, no, obviously this isn't bad. So things do change when we get that fullness of the picture, but we're so short-sighted in life because we don't have the big picture. We might have an idea of what's going to happen, but we don't really know. I now knew. So things changed for me. And I understood as I'm looking at him, the ultimate, the paragon of suffering. I mean, he is the perfect model of suffering. And I'm watching him, I'm looking at him, I'm studying everything that he's doing and saying to me. And I realize that's what suffering joyfully is, for God to come down from heaven and to take on the form of a human being in order to suffer and save us and offer us salvation. That's love. That's what it's about. He suffered joyfully for us. How could I not do the same for him? And then that leads into exactly what he told me for the third one, which was to share his love. So like him coming down from heaven, we're already here, but we have to share that love. We have to be willing to try to do whatever it takes to get each other to heaven. That's what love is. His love is all about bringing us into communion with him. So our love for each other, we have to put God first. That's why prayer is always going to be number one. That's suffering joyfully. That goes both ways. That's for God, but it's also because God's going to use it to help others or to help us. One of those two things is going to take place. So our suffering is never in vain. If you lose somebody in life, it feels horrible, and it should feel horrible. You love that person. If you didn't love them, you wouldn't feel sadness. So the fact that you feel sadness, you should rejoice in that because you actually love that person that you said you loved. So now it's not just something you say, it's something you feel, something you really know. Now, while you can't experience that love, that sharing of love, the same way that we do in human life with that person, they're still alive up in heaven. They're still alive. They can hear your prayers. They can talk to you. But you just can't hug them. You can't, physically interact with them because they are spirit now. They're not that physical body like we are. But they have far more access to us than they ever would have before, and they love you more. So don't get all upset about the fact that you lost somebody. Think about how you can change that relationship with them. But to share his love is such an important thing, and we can't just stop when we lose somebody, and we can't just give up on life and say, well, why would a good God take this person? I can't give you the answer to that. That God has his own plans, and he didn't tell me how to figure out what his mind is thinking. But I can tell you this, whatever he does is always for our best good. It might have been for that person's best good that they had to die. Who knows what was going to happen? Maybe something traumatic like what happened to me was going to end up happening to them. So he spared them of it. Or, something like happened to me, he did that to change me, because had I continued to live on my life the way that I had been, there is no way I would have become the person I am today. And I'm much happier the way that I am now. So I thank God for this. But as he's telling me that I need to share his love, I knew I had to share this story, but it wasn't just sharing this story. It was sharing this story in a way that actually brings it to people, that I'm able to actually touch people's lives, to actually share my story in a relationship with people. So as I continue with these videos, I want people to feel free to contact me. If you have questions, you've got concerns, you've got some struggles in your life, feel free to contact me. I'm going to contact you back. I'm not going to leave an email or a message unanswered, because he told me to share his love. I'm definitely going to do it. so you're going to give me an opportunity. Please help me to fulfill God's will. We'll do it together. We'll both be living in God's will. It'll be a wonderful thing. But I want to take some time right now to show you, before I get onto the rest of my story, I want to show you what my heart looked like, because, this is important to me to be able to share this, because this is what my heart looked like when I had a transplant 2 years after I had died. So that's my heart and what it looked like 2 years after I had died. I got a transplant. Took 2 years for me to be able to get it. But that's how bad my heart was at that moment when I died. All that grossness, like here, you can see it again. See all this grossness up here? There's scar tissue everywhere. All that white is just gross scar tissue. The whole heart is completely, down here, you'd have to have a doctor explain all these things to you. I'm not going to be able to point out, but everything's so thin, and there's just, it's not the way a heart's supposed to look. You can look at a heart, you can see how they actually are supposed to look. That's a horrible, thing's going dark on me. Oh, there we go. But you can see how bad it is. But this heart wasn't working. It wasn't working when I died. That's why I died, because it wasn't working. It wasn't working after my death up until the heart transplant. You could see the lack of blood flow, all the data. I've got all kinds of medical paperwork that can show how my heart wasn't functioning, and the doctors couldn't figure out, anything else they could do. They did everything they could possibly come up with, medications, all kinds of different ablations and different things that they were trying to do to help sustain me long enough to be able to get to transplant. But it was as if God had his hand on my heart the whole time and was making it pump just enough to keep me going until I got to that transplant. But it wasn't that miracle. And I still had hoped out, even though I knew, it wasn't going to happen. Jesus told me it wasn't going to happen. But, I still prayed for it. I wasn't sure how to just not pray for that. That's something that I think we typically do. But I didn't know how it was going to turn out. So I didn't know what else to do. The fact that he had his hand on my heart, though, it was as if he wanted me to develop this strong faith, this trust, this trust in him. And I ended up writing a book. It's this book, but it's called From Sudden Death to Paradise. So it chronicles everything that I went through, from when I first got sick. And it kind of even gives a little introduction about my life, prior to that, just to give you a little bit of background on who I am. But then it goes all the way past into my transplant. But the thing is that, I wrote this book just so that I could get the information out. I didn't want to die and then not have this wonderful experience explained, because I had literally just died. I had no clue how long I was going to live, but my heart was bad. There was no way that I was going to live with that heart without something happening. And, God never told me he was going to hold my heart in his hand until I get a transplant 2 years later, but he ended up doing that. That is what he ended up doing. So as I'm told to share his love, and then he tells me, well, now you got to go back. So as soon as I had to go back, that separation from him is the only time I felt real pain in heaven. And it was really intense throughout my whole soul. It was different than any kind of physical pain that you have in life. It was, I guess you could call it like pins and needles, but like all over the inside of your being. Imagine that you were feeling like just heart sick, how we get when we lose somebody or something happens that we care very much about, but it just makes us sick to our heart. That's what it kind of felt like, but pins and needles, heart sick all through my soul. Nothing physical, not like, if you got a pain in your leg, in your thigh, that feels way different than heart sick. So you kind of get what I'm talking about. But that's what it felt like. So I'm walking back and I'm trying to struggle. It felt like I was going through concrete. It was really difficult to move. I could barely move through this stuff, but I had to force myself. And the whole time I'm like, did I make the right decision? I didn't want to leave Jesus. I could feel that the pain was just that separation from Jesus. The further I got, the more painful it got. And then I got through the light. I had to go back the same way that I came in. So I went through the light, and as I came through the other side of the light, I could see my tunnel. Now, this is one of those things with the periphery. I could see everything that was going on. And, before I get to the tunnel, I'm going to have to explain one more thing about time, because this part was just amazing. But time is like a little pinpoint. It's not this linear thing that we think of, where I was born, I went to kindergarten, went to high school, graduated college, did this, did that, got married. All those things that people typically do, we think of, okay, well, I can go back and think about, whoa, I got married here. So we can focus on our memory of marriage. And then we come back to our life and we're up and down. We can go to whatever other memory we want. Not in heaven. In heaven, you can have them all at once. You can see your marriage here. You can see your birth over here. You can see, graduating boot camp. You can see the college graduation. You can see all those things, at the exact same time. But whatever you focus on, you specifically give your attention to, is the one that becomes crystal clear. And that's what time was like, is that I had access to everything that had happened in history, but my whole focus with Jesus was on my interactions in life, the sins that I had done. So while I might have, Bob's sins, I knew everything that Bob had done in his whole life, I can't remember any of that. Even the things that I paid somewhat attention to in those memories, I still don't have crystal clear memories, and they feel kind of blurred. But the ones that I did focus on, those are crystal clear, and they're better than any memory I've ever had. And that's what that life, or that ability was like. It was such a high level of cognition, and to be able to go through all of those memories at the exact same time and know which ones you wanted to think of and pull on one to another and connect these things. And, as you're seeing your sins and how they affected other people and into their lives. And it's crazy to think about that, because my brain still can't even contain that kind of knowledge. And it's just a concept now, it's not like I'm not actually able to do that anymore. It was incredible. So as I'm looking at this tunnel, it also felt like there were, tunnels for everybody else, but that I really cannot say. It seemed like that to me, but I was so fixated on my tunnel. And like I said, it didn't have a sign that said, hey, Brian's tunnel, you got to go here. I just knew which tunnel was mine. So I just went right to it. So that's why, everything in the periphery just seemed like that. I don't know that it really was, but I do know that my tunnel now did not have that dark void at the end. What was at the end of my tunnel was the circular view of my hospital room. And it was as if it was coming through my own eyes, which were closed, but I could see into my room and everything that was happening in my room. I could see the nurses and where they were and what they were doing, see what the doctors were doing. They had this big machine on me. It's a big green machine called the Lucas machine. I later found out because I had asked about it. I was like, well, what was that machine you guys had on me? Well, the Lucas machine is just a CPR machine. It just does CPR compressions while you're dead. But anyway, as I'm going down this tunnel, going back to my room, I'm coming back into my body, and as I entered into my body, it was I didn't have to be explained. Nobody explained anything about how to do it. I just naturally did it. So when you're dead, you have far more understanding of how things work. But I just snapped into my body, and as soon as I snapped back into my body, everything seemed to close off behind me, except I knew it didn't. I knew God was still there. That trust that he had helped me to learn to have, that was strong. It stayed with me. But so did that feeling of ecstasy. I could still feel his love, and it was really powerful. But it felt like that closure was more of the life's distractions, because as soon as I popped into my own body again, all the noise, all the chaos, fear started coming in, trying to attack me from every direction. But the first thing I did, I popped my eyes open and I was like, did I just die? Went right up to the doctor, as far as I could, because I had just died and I'm strapped down and everything. So just like your little head pops up. But his face, he was standing right next to me, and the look on his face was like, yeah, but first, actually, I had to say it twice, which was really funny, because he came really close to me and he had this look, just this shock on his face. I really think that they had just given up because they had already taken the Lucas machine off before I had snapped back into my body. So I kind of think that they were giving up and, you know, what you're going to call it. But I popped into my body at the right moment, which just startled this doctor. And he had this look on his face like, oh, I'm so glad you're back because I didn't want to lose a patient. But he leans over and he's like, yeah, you just died. And, you know, I wanted to ask that because, you know, I'd never believed in near-death experience. I thought that was a lot of neurotransmitters that were just released at the same time when somebody died, and that was causing these hallucinations, you know, all that stuff. You know, most of the science now is debunked that we don't have that ability. Our neurotransmitters cannot cause that kind of conscious increase, nor can it cause it to where it happens immediately when you die throughout the whole time that you're dead and then stops as soon as you come back to your body. That's just ridiculous. But I still did have the ecstasy. I still did have that enjoyment because those are emotions that were able to reconnect with my soul as it entered into my body. So my soul was able to take that love and bring it back with me, which makes me know that we can share that love in a real way. We can actually be that instrument of love that somebody else needs to have in their life. And that's what I plan to do with the rest of my life. You know, and as I was sharing my story, the nurses that were there, I was telling them, you know, that particularly the charge nurse, I was telling her, well, you were right here and you were doing this and you were doing that. And then, you know, the Lucas machine ended up breaking a couple of my ribs. And, you know, I knew that they were, I didn't know if they were necessarily broken. I knew they hurt because it was really painful. And of course, you know, I couldn't breathe very well anyway, because my lungs I have scar tissue in my lungs. The disease attacks everything. But I couldn't breathe real well. And you know, I was like, well, I think something happened with that machine you guys had on me. It started hurting me. And so we were talking about this. She's like, how'd you see that? You know, because my eyes were closed and, you know, I was dead. So there was no way I could have seen it. And as soon as, you know, me and her were talking, I was telling her every place that she was and what she was doing, because, you know, she was really involved and she was super talented at her job. So she was directing everybody and what to do. And, you know, you could just tell that it was just overwhelming to her. Ended up being that all the other nurses, I mean, a ton of nurses, all that week I was in the ICU, just kept coming in and out of my room. Can you tell us your story? And, you know, I'm going to show you some pictures of what I looked like after I died, because you wouldn't expect somebody to be, you know, looking like this. Everybody I've ever seen on the ICU does not look this cheery. So, you know, I've been on the ICU quite a few times, but so here's a picture of what I look like. Let me see the best way to do it. So you can, I guess you can't really see the scar. There's a little scar right here where oh yeah, you can see it now. But that scar, what they had to do is they had to put in a defibrillator / pacemaker in, because they wanted to be able to pace me out of some of these arrhythmias if possible, and then still be able to shock me. And they also wanted to have a different device that would be able to shock me at those lower levels than the really powerful one that I had, because, you know, it was too powerful for one thing. So they really wanted to just change that out. And so they had to go into a surgery, and it was emergency surgery. So they took me from my ICU bed and took me down to surgery prep right away. And so they ended up cutting right here, and they couldn't use anesthesia. But, you know, it didn't even faze me. I honestly can't say that it didn't it hurt and that I was so strong, you know, that's why it didn't faze me, or because I had so much faith, it didn't faze me. I think God just made it not hurt me, because it felt like a little pinch, and you know, like somebody drawing your blood. That's really kind of what it felt like, just a real minor little pinch. Not a big deal at all. The whole thing I was feeling was God's love. I just couldn't shake it. It was like his love was just saturated into my soul. And so, you know, as the doctor's doing this surgery, me and him are talking about sports. I'm telling him jokes. He's telling me a few jokes, you know, but the whole time I'm just thinking about what I just experienced, you know. And, you know, I really appreciated the doc trying to distract me and to try to make it as, you know, pleasant as he could for that type of a surgery. He was a great doctor for doing that, but he didn't need to, because I was feeling great. It was wonderful. And so after that, you know, he ended up sending me back to my room, and, you know, I got paced a few times, and I don't think I got shocked anymore that week, which was really a nice thing. But I I still was in ICU. They were worried I was going to die. My heart was not doing well, but I didn't. I made it, and I got out of the hospital in a week, and that was really cool because, like I showed you that picture. I'm smiling. I don't look like somebody who just died, and so that's pretty amazing. But I want to show you some other pictures here in a second. Well, here's one of my kids and me at my first heart failure. My wife's the one taking the picture, but that's what really hurt me the whole time. I was worrying about what's going to happen with them, and who's going to take care of them, and look how little they are. And it was really tough. But he took that fear away in heaven. I knew that he was going to take care of them. I don't have to worry about that. Doesn't mean that I don't still have to do what I have to do as a parent. I do everything I can for my kids. And, if I had to, I'm going to lay down my life for my kids. Actually, I'm going to probably do it for anybody now. I just do it more willingly for my kids. I'd be pleased to do so. But I don't have to worry about their well-being because I know God has a better handle on that than I do. I still do my part. He still gives me authority as a father to actually help my children and do things for them. But that's really just, it was so wonderful that he made that fear go away because it freed me to live my life without any unhealthy attachments. I like to say I have this holy detachment because I can't control what happens with my kids. I can't control if they get this issue from my toxic chemical exposure being passed along to them through my genes now. I can't stop that. I don't know what's going to happen with that. And they do know one thing is that God's going to take care of them. He's going to protect them. I could see it up there in heaven. He told me as much. He's not a liar. I know this to be true. And then, I had to wait those 2 years to get that heart transplant. And that was tough. I'm going to show you a couple pictures of the heart transplant, the aftermath. But yeah, it was a long 2 years. But the trust is what helped me get through it because I was in and out of the hospital. I took over I think it was 11 hospital or ambulance rides. I was in the hospital. Oh my goodness. Well over 60 times. I mean, it was just unbelievable in a 3-year time span, to get my transplant, that little bit of time. I was in and out of the hospital that much. I mean, I've got a stack of hospital bracelets, where they wrap those bracelets around you. I got a stack of them because I just wanted to see how I made it through this. I'm going to keep this thing, and ended up keeping them all. And it's just a kind of a daunting thing to look at, that I made it through that. And there's only one reason I can make it. I gave up. It's not my human strength that made me get through this. It was God. I had given up already back in 2017. So come to the heart transplant in 2019, and I have this totally different outlook. Of course I'm going to do well in the transplant. I ended up getting out of the hospital in a week after the transplant. And, it was long surgery. My transplant surgery was long. That poor doctor, I don't know how he was able to go that long in a transplant, but he did a great job. But this is what I look like after I didn't take this picture, obviously, and I don't remember it being taken. It just happens to be one of the ones that was on my phone. I think my mom took that, but that's me after the transplant. Obviously I'm still not awake, but so that's kind of what I look like there. Pretty gross. But here's another one that more normal, because this is like a day or two after the transplant. They finally gave me a popsicle. You're not allowed to have water or food or anything like that. So those popsicles, they're a lifesaver. They're wonderful. That was my favorite thing. I don't even like popsicles, but it was wonderful then. But you can see all the equipment. I'll show you a better picture of all the IVs and things that they had me hooked up to, because I think it's really important to see just how devastating this was. Even after I had already died, I still had to go through all this suffering, but none of it fazed me. And so there's me. But look at that stack of IVs. I mean, let me see if I can do a little bit better of a picture. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. But you see that stack of IVs? I mean, that's a lot of stuff hooked up to oxygen. I mean, all kinds of things, and in the day later, they're having you up walking. It was brutal. But, all of those things didn't faze me one bit because of what I had experienced. And honestly, that's what was available for all of us. I can tell you one thing about God is that he is faithful. He loves us so much. And when he tells us he's going to be with us forever, he's not lying. He's going to be with you and me and everyone else who wants him every moment of your life, no matter what you feel. It doesn't matter if you feel like he's abandoning you. That's usually our own feelings coming from inside. That can be, temptations. That can be a lot of other things, but he's there. We just got to look for him harder. If there's something that's blinding us to where God is, call out to him. If you're a person who doesn't have faith, you don't know what to think, you don't know how to talk to God, ask him to teach you. He will. He's not cruel. He's super nice. I'm telling you right now, he's the nicest being you'll ever see. He's just so wonderful, and he loves you. He loves you so much. Just don't worry about it. If you are a person who says, well, I don't believe in Jesus, I don't believe in, you know what? If you're a Christian, I don't recommend challenging God or trying to, tempt him or anything like that. But if you're not a Christian, it's not a sin to ask him to prove himself to you. He will definitely prove himself. Now you got to be ready for the answer, because sometimes he's really creative with how he gives you the answer. But that creativity is what builds strength in your faith. So look for it. Be open to it, because I'm telling you right now, he is real. He's there. He was the only one there. There was no one else. All the other deities that people like to call upon or worship, they were not there in heaven. Only Jesus was. So if you want to get to heaven, that's who you got to call on. And I guarantee he will not fail you. He will be there for you. So I just want to leave the rest of this video that way. Is that, just pray more and suffer joyfully and share his love. Those are the keys to getting to heaven. And if you do those things, you're going to be fine. In this natural order of life, the price of admission is pain. We have to accept that. We weren't meant to die. We were meant to be created into a life in a relationship with God. It was through our own faults. Our parents, Adam and Eve, they had the original sin. That original sin entered death into the world. That's just the way it is. The natural order has certain rules. And, if you eat too many sweets, you're going to get a stomach ache. God doesn't have to punish you for eating too many sweets, for your greed. And he allows nature to take that course. Nature will not let you get away with just eating too many sweets. It's just the way it is. Same thing with anything else that happens in nature. My heart, that's just the way it goes. It wasn't God causing this. It was nature. That's how the world works. But God is there to give us the strength to get through these things. He wants us to have that communion with him forever in heaven. That is what our lives are about. So anything you go through, just know that it's helping you to get to heaven if you use it properly. And that's what we have to do. We have to use every single situation for us and for others to get to heaven. Thank you, and God bless you and your families.